Hello, good evening. Welcome to this warm welcome to this talk for Cumbria Wildlife Trust. My name is Sylvia Woodhead. I'm a member of Cumbria GeoConservation, which is the voluntary specialist geology group of Cumbria Wildlife Trust. Now, before I actually start, can I say, if you have any questions, can you please put them in chat and I'll do my best to answer them later. So Eycott Hill Reserve, I'm sure you all know it. It's an absolutely wonderful site. It is a geological SSSI, a biological SSSI, a geological conservation review site, and it's also a local geological site designated by Cumbria GeoConservation. We're the only conservation organisation that deals with education. Education is one of our 4 objectives, and we've produced quite a lot of geological interpretation material about Icot, which you'll be sent details about afterwards. And so this talk, I think, is sort of part of that. Now, I think that my title here possibly needs a question mark, because it was thought that the Eycott Hills were the earliest volcanoes in the Lake District. Some recent measurements have suggested that they may be nearly the oldest, but anyway, we will see. The Icot lavas opened up as fissures, very much as, nearly very much as is happening in Iceland currently. In geology, we have a saying which is, the present is the key to the past. So in order to understand the geology of Icot, we need to look at the present to see where is there anywhere that's happening just like Icot. Now, the answer is there isn't, because the processes, the plate tectonic processes that happened all those years ago, 460 million years ago, were actually more violent than they are now. So this little picture here of Iceland, of a fissure opening up and lava covering the existing landscape, gives us a tiny glimpse of what Icot might have been like, except that it was in a completely different plate tectonic setting. Iceland's on a hotspot in a spreading ridge. All those years ago, Icot was on the edge of a continent somewhere down near the South Pole. However, Icot is very definitely a former volcanic province. This particular board is on Icot Reserve as you're going down towards the upland wall. Now, if you look on the sort of right-hand side of this diagram, you can see that there are fissures which have opened up on the ground and lava is spreading out to cover the landscape. It's being fed by a system of dikes that are coming up from a magma reservoir down below. There may or may not have been these great big typical volcanic cones. If there were, they were probably smaller than depicted, and they may well have sunk into a crater lake under the sea, underwater. And so some of these rocks have been preserved all this long geological time. Now, the little diagram below shows you how the lavas have been tilted, and you get a little indication of what the landscape actually looks like now. However, let's imagine that this is your next visit to Icot and you've just arrived in the car park. You get out of your car and what do you see? In the distance to the west, you see that wonderful saddleback horizon view of Blencathra. They composed of the oldest rocks in the Lake District. In the car park is this amazing geological interpretation board, and below it there is a dispenser for leaflets, and that dispenser is usually kept immaculately full of geology leaflets about a walk on the Icot Reserve. Now, this particular board, like the previous one, was drawn and designed by Dr. Elizabeth Pickett, who a former British Geological Survey geologist, an excellent illustrator. Now, this one shows you that you are here in the middle on Carboniferous limestone, the youngest rock in the area. And then if you look at the right-hand side, the cutaway 3D section through the geology, you see the different lava flows, but they're just coated with some deposits left by glaciers in the Ice Age. If you look further, then they are underlain in turn by folded siltstones and mudstones, and those are the rocks which Elizabeth refers to as older than the hills. Here are the hills, the old hills, Blencathra again, composed of these ancient Ordovician Skiddaw rocks, formed about 480 million years ago in a deep ocean. Now, the Icot rocks that you can see in the foreground to the right of the Belty, they should be up in the air way above the top of Blencathra, but they've been eroded away from up there. And it's believed that Blencathra and the hills of the Lake District are partly elevated because there is a deep mass of granite deep underground. When you're down at the far side of Icot, you can see the Icot lavas in the foreground, in the bottom right of this picture. You can see a view of Carrick Fell. Now, it's not a good analogy, but that sort of batholith of intruded rocks might be something like the batholith that is underneath the Lake District. Carrick Fell, ancient rocks again. You get a good view from Icot, and the rocks are very complex on Carrick Fell. Looking towards the southwest, also from Icot, because I mean, one of the wonderful things about Icot is that you've got this all-round view of almost all the rocks in the Lake District. You can see the Northern Lake District hills, the Borrowdale volcanic group of rocks, also Ordovician, formed in a period of perhaps about 5 million years, and they mostly formed after the Eycott lavas. So the Eycott lavas are mostly older than most of the Ordovician Borrowdale volcanic rocks. So we've got Borrowdale volcanics to the left of this picture, and Blencathra, the Skiddaw, the oldest rocks. So, you know, in answer to my question, which are the oldest volcanic rocks, I'm not really in a position to say, other than to say that the rocks are very definitely volcanic. Now, this is a little excerpt of the British Geological Survey sheet for the area, and what you can see to the left, labelled SKG in grey, are the Skiddaw rocks, which are so very ancient, they're being reconsidered as to whether or not they are Cambrian. Now, the Icot rocks, labelled EVG in two kinds of pink colour, are what's called the type locality for the Icot volcanic rock. And they are very, very different from all the Borrowdale volcanic rocks. Now, again, you can see that those rocks are covered, they're cut off, their outcrop is cut off by Carboniferous limestone, shown in blue here. Now, interestingly, there was a clockmaker in Keswick back in 1820 called Jonathan Otley. His house can be seen in Keswick, and he was a great one for walking around, and he walked from Keswick over to Icot, and he recognised that the Icot lavas were different. Now, this simple geological sketch by Mike Dewey has the advantage of showing the road, which shows you where the car park is. And if you look down at the quay, you'll see that that's Carboniferous limestone. Then you've got these coloured layers, sort of north-south layers. And again, if you look at those, they say that the rock is andesite, some of it flow-banded. And blue is the special Icot andesite. And the keen-eyed among you will see that the rocks have been offset by a whole series of faults. When you go to the far side of Icot and you look at the scarps, the hills that are there of the lava flows, you can see that they've been offset. So you can see that when you're there on Icot. Very oddly, in orange, Mike draws the Skiddaw group of rocks. So let's look at those first. In Mungrisdale, there is the most amazing quarry. It's very close to the road, and it really is well worth visiting. You can just go into it, and it is Skiddaw group rocks. These rocks that you're looking at were once mudstones that formed at the bottom of the sea, and they were formed, as I say, about 470, 480 million years ago, and an enormous number of things have happened to them since. They're, for example, they're more or less on end. They've been hardened, they've been folded, they've been thrust, they've had other things intruded into them. They've been turned into ancient mountains and eroded for millions and millions of years. If you look at the top right at the skyline, you can sort of imagine that they were eroded to form an ancient landscape. From the top of Schoolhouse Quarry, you can see the road. Mungrisdale village is just off to the right of this picture. And then if you have a look in the top right, then you can see Eycott Hill. So you're looking from the lowest rocks, the oldest rocks, and I think in this picture you can see that the Icot lavas have been deposited on top of the Skiddaw rocks here. So here we have a telephoto view of Eycott Hill from Mungrisdale, and the Skiddaw group rocks are underneath the Nadel Valley here. They weather to form a very clayey, impermeable soil, so the ground is really quite wet. Now, there is an erosion surface where millions of years of geological time are missing, and we call that time gap an unconformity. And it is intriguingly at the base of the slope. I've drawn a red line which may or may not indicate exactly where the unconformity is. Now, on top of that were erupted the lavas of Icot. Now, the Wildlife Trust has put in a new footpath from Mungrisdale across that low ground and over to Eycott Hill Reserve. And that new footpath is marked by the same white posts that take you up to the summit. Now, I think at this point, we might like to see a little video. So if Helen can oblige. Thank you. How do we get back? Helen, how do we? Right, okay, thank you. Thank you, that was excellent. That little video is actually 8 minutes and it really is worth looking at. There are a whole lot of them out there which show you what it's like when lava is erupting and covering the landscape. It must have been absolutely horrific at the time, and huge volumes of lava were erupted. It all seems quiet and peaceful now. So this picture is at the bottom of Eycott Hill, looking at the top in the distance to Bowscale Fell, which are these ancient Skiddaw rocks. We've said that the Skiddaw rocks underlie the Naddlesbeck. You'd only find that out if there was a reason to do a borehole with this unconformity at the base of the slope. Now, the unconformity is part of the Geological Conservation Review Site status and the SSSI, but infuriatingly, the unconformity is really, really difficult to see. It's exposed in two places, both of which are private, and I've not actually managed to get to most of them. Currently I'm reading a book about how geologists look for unconformities because they mark the boundary between one rock and another rock, and they're not always very obvious. Just where I've written lowest Icot lavas, just above there is where the lowest of the ridges of the Icot lavas now is, and that's the oldest of them. That's the first lava that erupted, and the lavas erupted for possibly 10 million years, huge period of time, unimaginable, and they covered the landscape. Now, the thing about the Icot lavas is that the lowest lavas, the so-called Icot type of rock, has got these huge crystals in. Now, in answer to a question that Richard might be listening in, no, this is not a loose block of rock. This is in fact part of the exposure of the lowest lowest lava. One of the things about geology is we quite liked the sheep that used to be on Icot because they would have eaten away all this grass and you'd have seen more rock. But that's an ongoing argument that I won't go on about now. In the background, you can see the summit of Eycott Hill. So a close-up shows you these amazing feldspar crystals. They're an unusual feldspar called bytownite. It has an unusual composition, which I can't quite remember at the moment, a complex silicate. And it's thought that these formed in the magma chamber in a sort of 2 stages of cooling before they were erupted onto the surface as red hot lava, well over 1,000 degrees C, I would say. Now, as the lavas cooled down, as they cooled down, they contracted and they cracked. And on this picture, you ought to be able to see diagonal lines going across, which are cooling columns. And the lavas cooled and cracked into these. So sometimes the light is good. This diagram, you may be able to see some faint lines. The lava flow, this would have been one lava flow, I think, and the base would have cooled because it would have been flowing over the solid ground surface, and so that the base of that lava flow would all have been rubbly as it rolled along. The upper surface would have cooled against the air. Now, some of the most famous of these cooling columns are seen in the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, and this is called the organ pipes. Now, once again, it's not a good analogy, having formed in a different plate tectonic situation, it's a mere 60 million years old compared to Icot's 460 million years old. So it's amazing that you can still see these features on Icot. Way back, I don't know why I've labelled this 2008, but when you go to the Giant's Causeway, you are unlikely to be on your own, and it is of course famous for all these hexagonal columns, which are the cooling columns of the basalt lava that erupted here. Now, I've always been told that these formed because the lava was of an even composition and it contracted evenly round evenly spaced joints, and the hexagonal is a natural shape in nature. Now, I did read in the paper this amazing story here. Researchers at Liverpool University had tried to find out how these hexagonal cooling columns formed. And so they'd taken a core of lava from the Eycott Hill volcano in Iceland, which they heated up to 1,000 degrees C until it softened into lava. And then they let it cool down, and they discovered that it fractured somewhere below 900 degrees C. So at one time, the Icot lavas were, we can assume perhaps were formed, the lavas cooled and cracked when they reached about 900 degrees C. One of the great advantages also of the Causeway coast is that it has been eroded by the sea. And so you get what geologists love, which is a great cross-section through the rocks. I can't quite see how we can achieve that at Icot, but never mind. What you can see is a whole series of lava flows. You can see the cooling columns very, very clearly on the left-hand side. The top two columns are particularly clear, and you can also see the rubbly top and the rubbly base of the columns. Now, I don't quite know how many lava flows are here, half a dozen perhaps. On Icot, there are over 20. So if you can just imagine the thickness of lavas which erupted onto the surface at Icot back in those Ordovician times. So here they are, 460 million years later, and they form a scenery which is called trap topography. That is the name for lavas when they have been tilted. So we've got scarps and dips where the rocks are exposed at the surface. Now, the rock is called an andesite, which is a sort of medium medium rock. It's a little bit coarser than a basalt. It is dark coloured, although you're going to say, well, that's not dark, it's grey. And in fact, it's covered with all kinds of lichen on the surface. But the little picture shows you some dark material. Geologists like to break open the rock to see a new surface, because in there you would see a mixture of crystals, dark crystals, pyroxenes, and light crystals, which are the feldspars. But this is the ordinary andesite, if you like. It's only in that lower lava flow that you have the really huge crystals. But what you can see here, I think this is the very near the sheep field, and you can see that there is clear flow banding. Can you see sort of horizontal lines going across the face of the lava there? And this is called flow banding, and it's created as the magma rises up and is hot and sort of stretches out the crystals to give this lineation, which showed that these rocks flowed on the surface before they cooled down. So, like at the Giant's Causeway, the tops and the bottoms of the lava flows were softer, and they've eroded away into these hollows, which are important for biology. And the lavas are sort of hidden there. They're probably full of glacial deposits and peat. And you can see how imperfect, in a way, are the exposures of the lavas. But the trap topography, these repeated ridges and hollows, the scarps and the dips, or the dips and the scarps, make Icot a very unusual scenery. You've got to go to Northern Ireland to see this. You don't see that anywhere else in the Lake District. This is what makes Icot such a distinctive place. in the background, you can see some green fields. And those green fields will be covered in glacial drift, but they're limestone as well, Carboniferous limestone. Now, if you look in the extreme background, you can see the Pennines, which are also made of Carboniferous rocks. And if you look in the walls near the car park, you'll see some of those rocks. Now, this particular wall that I photographed is almost entirely of Icot lava. It's very blocky. It has a very distinctive growth of lichen on it. But that's the Icot lavas. Now, in this old picture here, taken by the British Geological Survey, they talk about scarp and dip topography of the Icot volcanic group, and they point out how it contrasts with the smoother, regular scarps in the background, which are the overlying Carboniferous limestone. Now, there's an unconformity at the eastern side of Icot, because we saw on the geological map that the limestone form goes over the eroded Icot lavas. So the U to the side of here represents an unconformity, and we've got over 100 million years of geological time missing. However, we do have some ideas as to what happened in that time. It was the Devonian period, and there is visible from Icot some hills of a very unusual rock. This hill is Great Melfel, and Great Melfel, Little Melfel, Pooley Bridge, they're made of a rock called the Melfel Conglomerate, and it is made up of eroded mountains, ancient mountains, rocks that once covered the whole of the Lake District, and this pebbly conglomerate has formed these very distinctive shaped hills, again seen from Icot. Now, if you would like, when you go to Icot, to go over the road, there is another local geological site called Highbanks Wood. You follow a footpath, go over a stile, into some open access land, and as you can see, you get a nice view of Carrick Fell and also from Blencathra there. But it's limestone, it's Carboniferous limestone. It's dipping to the east, the same as the lavas are on Icot, and it's above this unconformity. The limestone dissolves in rainwater in dilute acid, because that's what rainwater is. And so you've got all these solution holes where the glacial drift is falling into holes in the limestone, unless, of course, they are pits for the stone walls, which might be. Now, on Highbanks Wood and also on Icot, you can find boulders that don't belong. Some of them are rounded like this one. This particular one is either Borrowdale volcanic rock or Icot volcanic rock, and it's perched on limestone pavement. So you've got old rock on top of young rock. Now that shouldn't happen. So this block has been moved by the ice. It's either been moved from the south or from the west by the ice. And so next time you go to Icot, have a look for some of these erratic blocks, because they give you indications of what the ice actually did. And it left a cover of glacial drift as well as these pebbles. Now we're back to Icot here, and what you can see in the background is the woodland that is Highbanks Wood. The wall, the limestone wall, is where the road is. And this is the top meadow. It's a bit rough, as you can see, but it's worth going to, because there are a whole lot of sinkholes, which were first seen by David Harpley. And every time you go, they're different, they're active, because what is happening here is there's some glacial drift over the underlying limestone, and water trickling down through that glacial drift is widening the joints in the limestone, and the glacial drift is disappearing into these holes in the ground. So this is an active sinkhole. You can't really see brilliantly well, but water was trickling down here, and this was one of those that had freshly opened. Doesn't it show you how the old name of boulder clay was a very good name for the glacial drift or till left by the ice? Now, when we went in March to make a film, the water was actively running down, and there was a little stream, and you could see water trickling down and going down into yet another of these sinkholes. So we went in March. Now, because David Attenborough always ends his programs by saying how something was made, I'm going to say a little bit about how one of the films was made. But first of all, this is John Rogers. John Rogers is the president of the Cumberland Geological Society, and he has led a lot of geology walks in Icot. You'd be very lucky if you've been on one of those, because he has a good tale to tell, and here he is opposite the sheepfold explaining how these lavas formed. Now, some time ago, John was videoed by a student at the University of Cumbria, and this student managed to hold his camera still while John talked in 3 locations on Icot, in, I'm afraid, the usual strong wind that there is on Icot. However, when we went in March with aerial artwork, that's Colin Aldred, it was a day to be believed. Now, I don't colour pictures. The sky really was that colour. So Eycott Summit is off to the right, and we've come down to some of the lower parts of Icot. And Colin here is telling his drone to go over to Mungrisdale, and it's probably hovering over that quarry that I first showed you. Absolutely amazing technology. Having a great time here. It's when I took the pictures of all those cattle that the drone did not upset the cattle. There was a cattle watcher there, and she said they didn't take any notice of it at all. And anyway, you can't see the drone in that picture. So here is Colin with his drone. Where is the drone? Well, there. And it does seem as though I've given you a whistle-stop tour of Icot, because as it said there, that is the end. So I'm not sure I've got any questions, but I think I have finished my input. So Helen, if you'd like to take over and see if anybody would like to ask any questions about Icot. Otherwise, we can just say, well, there's loads of films, and it's a good place to go and visit at any time. Thank you very much.
Oh, hang on a sec, Sylvia. Just don't disappear. Just in case there are any questions. There's one from Marta. If anyone does have any questions, please do pop them in the chat now, and hopefully Sylvia will be able to answer them for you. Just to note as well that we'll pop all the videos and kind of references mentioned in our post-event email, so you'll have all that afterwards as well, including the recording of the video. So, Sylvia, if you wanted to answer those 2 questions that have just popped.
Right, okay. Well, yes, Marta has asked a question about where would the lava erupt from, where the Eycott Hill summit is. It's a difficult question because there is absolutely no way that we can know where the fissures actually were. It is assumed that they were fissures, but they would there would have been different ones opening and closing. We cannot identify a volcanic centre. So the little clip of Iceland was sort of a bit misleading in terms of having a look at a volcanic crater. These are so old that I'm not sure that anyone knows exactly where the lavas came from. So that is a I think that is a problem. It's difficult to envisage that what you're sort of seeing has been, a lot of it is all missing. Modern names for boulder clay: tillite, diamicton. Will that do? Whoa! Can I describe the difference between the older EVG rocks and the Skiddaw rocks? I can. The Skiddaw rocks are sedimentary. They are siltstones and sandstones, and they were originally laid down in layers, and sometimes you can see the layers. The Icot rocks are volcanic. They erupted onto the surface, and they have a crystalline structure. They're made up of a matrix of different crystals set in a smaller ground mass. So, Alison, I hope that answers your question. Do come back. Robert Gibbs asked if the drone footage is available, and yes, the film that Colin made is available, and Helen will put it in the post-talk details. What Colin did was he took a whole series of drone images and then put them together in a film, and we managed to put a few words to try to explain the geology that was being seen there. Right, okay. So Tim asks, the lava levels that are now tilted must once have been level. Yes. How could they have become level again after being tilted? Well, I'm not sure they are level again because they are still tilted, the ones at Icot. But you can, I mean, obviously Earth movements can push something up and push something down again. Whoa, Bill asks, why has Icot eroded more than Blencathra? Can I just say I don't know the answer to that one? I wonder. I think Blencathra is formed of the Skiddaw rocks, which are thousands and thousands and thousands of meters thick, whereas there were only 20 lava flows at Icot. Now, perhaps I should have talked about weathering, because in an earlier picture we saw that the Icot lavas turn a sort of reddish colour and when they weather. The iron minerals, the pyroxenes, have a lot of iron in, and basically they rust, and so the rocks do weather. So I hope that answers that question. Anita has asked a question about how to watch it again, and I think Helen will answer that after the talk. Catherine, oh, sorry, I've missed one. Catherine is asking, are there similar landscapes elsewhere in England? And I think I have to say no, because someone will say I'm wrong, but Icot lavas. They are utterly different, I think, in age and nature from any other rocks, because the Borrowdale volcanic rocks might have a few lava flows in, although people think they might have been sills intruded into other rocks. So I don't know the geology of the whole of the Lake of England to know. So Icot is very, very special. Right, okay, Liz asks, can I explain an unconformity again? Right. An unconformity is a time gap between rocks being deposited. Rocks are laid down in layers, with the oldest at the bottom, and then the next layer on top, and the next layer on top of that. It's called the law of superposition. Now, when one layer forms directly on top of another layer without a time gap, we call that conformable. But in the fossil record, there's lots of times when the rocks that formed in other places are missing. And that's the case at both the top and the bottom of Icot, that the rocks are missing. And what has happened then is that the older rocks, the skidder rocks below the Icot, they were folded and eroded. They were cut across by weathering processes, and a new landscape formed. And 100 million years of geological time passed before lavas erupted on top of them. Similarly, on top of the lavas ought to be the Devonian rocks, and if they were deposited, they've gone as well, and Carboniferous rocks have been deposited on top. So I hope, Liz, that is answered your question about a nonconformity. I can't think quite where to go to find more information, but I'm sure I'll think of somewhere. Angela asks, are there regular guided geology walks? And the answer is yes. They run all through the year. I haven't looked up when they actually are, but I know that more are being offered. And the What's On, the Cumbria Wildlife Trust What's On will be out very, very shortly. Now, Jane asks an intriguing question about, have I any information about Black Combe on the southwest corner of the Lake District? The answer is yes. What do you want to know? It is skidder rock, the same as Blencathra. And I don't know in this format that I can add any more information. Now, Helen did say that she will put the Cumbria GeoConservation website on your post-talk details. On our website, which is hosted by the CBDC, we've got a lot of information. You'll find a geological map. You can see where our other geological sites are. We have 300 of them, and we have a couple around Black Combe. They're quarries at the base of Black Combe. So you can find out more. Elizabeth wants to know more about geology, which is absolutely great. The two organisations you ought to consider joining if you are in Cumbria, the Cumberland Geological Society, which is based in in Cumberland, and the Westmoreland Geological Society, which is based in Kendal. The Westmoreland have a talk tomorrow night, and I think that talk is being Zoomed. So try both of those websites. Right now, Nuala asks, the EVG are unique but limited in geographical extent. What does this suggest about the extent of the volcanism that led to their formation? I'm not sure that you can make a direct link between the size of the outcrop now and the processes that led all that time ago to their formation. I think, although I could be proved wrong, that Eycott lavas were formed as a huge province. I don't know, they may have been incredibly extensive. They're certainly more extensive than just Icot, because they're found in Binsey, in the hill called Binsey. But certainly now they're only found in the Northern Lake District. I don't know whether that actually answers your question, Nuala, really. In geology, what I'm discovering is, as time goes on, the more I thought I knew, the less I actually managed to keep. There are always more questions, which is what makes it so exciting and makes it a really good place to go to see. So, well, enjoy your next visit to Icot. Has that wrapped it up? Or other?
Anybody who wants to do a quick one at the end here?
Oh, right. Thank you, Nuala. It's always good to know if I've actually answered the question or if I've gone on about something else.
Fabulous.
Yes. Yeah, well, don't drive past Duncan because it really is worth going. You might need wellies after all this rain we've been having. It is a great place. Oh, aren't people polite?
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Sylvia. That was fantastic. As mentioned, I will send out everything, a recording link to this event and links to everything that Sylvia's mentioned in our post-event email. So you'll have that automatically. And you should get that in the next day or so. So thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Sylvia, for a fantastic talk.
Oh, not at all. I hope I've given you an insight that will sort of stay with you when you go to Icot, but I really do recommend that you have a look at Colin's film. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.